Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ajax Public Library's program Game-Bling, When Gaming Meets Gambling, presented by the YMCA. My name is Julia Campbell, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Library. I just wanted to start by covering a couple of housekeeping items. Tonight's presentation is being recorded, so I'd ask that you please keep your webcam and microphones off so that you are not displayed or heard in the recording. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this evening. I'm Sarah Hannaford, Youth Outreach Worker with the Youth Gambling Awareness Program. And just a little bit about the program. The YMCA Youth Gambling Awareness Program, also known as YGAP, is a free service funded by the Ontario Ministry of Health designed to raise awareness with regards to gambling, healthy and active living, and making informed decisions. And today our workshop, as I mentioned, is called Game-Bling, When Gaming Meets Gambling, where we will explore the blurred lines between gaming and gambling and the impact of technology on the gambling market. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Sarah to begin her presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Julia. It's so lovely to be here with you all today. So like Julia was mentioning, my name is Sarah, and I work for YMCA's Youth Gambling Awareness Program. So we do a lot of different kinds of presentations, and we work with youth age 8 to 24, as well as adults who are involved in youth lives or interested in learning more about youth gambling. And we talk about a variety of different topics. Today, like Julia was mentioning, we're going to be talking specifically about gaming and gambling and the intersection between the two and how they can sort of flow into each other. So before I get into our topic, I'll just tell you a little bit more about our program so you have a sense of where we're coming from when we're doing this work. So as a program, we are gambling neutral. And what I mean by that is we're trying to offer a balanced perspective on gambling. So we're trying to offer both some of the pros and some of the cons, and we provide all that information so anyone that we're talking to can sort of make the best decision that best fits into their lives. And we really do that to offer a harm reduction approach. And when I say harm reduction, similar to how the word sounds, maybe you're familiar with this term, but I'll just give a little explanation because sometimes it might be a new term to some folks. But harm reduction is really looking at ways to mitigate some of the risks that might be associated with some of the activities that we do. So a really easy example of this is, like putting on a seatbelt when we get into a car. That's a way of sort of reducing some of the risks around driving. So basically that's kind of the approach that we aim to take in our program, is to reduce some of the risks around gambling. And we take that youth approach, but we also just look a little bit broader than that. And we look at how to reduce some of the potential risks around gambling and around gaming, specifically like we're going to talk about today. And I will just note before we get into it, there is some interactive components to this workshop. So please feel free to add your answers into the chat and I will monitor it. So yeah, just wanted to make note of that before we continue. Okay, so the goals of this webinar, so what we'll be talking about today, I'll talk about the impact of technology on the gambling market. I'm also going to talk about the blurred lines between gambling and gaming. We'll learn a little bit about the risks of gambling and gaming. And like I was just mentioning, I'll provide some harm reduction strategies for both of these topics. Okay, so before I move forward, I think it's just helpful to provide a little bit more information about what I'm talking about when I'm saying gambling. So at YGAP, we have our own definition for gambling, and we say gambling is when you risk something of value and you don't know if you will win or lose. So there's kind of two parts that I want to highlight to you about this definition. The first is risking something of value. And we specifically use that wording because oftentimes when we think about gambling, and especially when we're talking to youth, the first thing that kind of comes to mind is money. And definitely there is a financial component to gambling, and we touch on that. But we also think that gambling can be a little bit broader than that, and it can be really risking anything of value. So, we'll talk about it a little bit more today, but this can be things like gems in a video game or risking skins, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. Or even with younger kids, it can be things like Pokemon cards or a toonie or whatever it is. So we take a more expansive approach when we look at something of value, and it's really just risking anything that we might value. And then that second part is if you don't know if you will win or lose. So really when we talk about gambling, we know it's a chance-based activity, so we can never be sure of what the outcome will look like. So that's kind of what our definition of gambling is. Okay, and we also talk about problem gambling and gaming, and we say problem gambling and gaming is when an activity impacts a person's life in a negative way. So it's important to note that the signs for this and what's considered problematic is really going to differ person to person. There's no sort of one size fits all box for this, but it's more so considering how that specific activity is impacting their life and if they're experiencing negative ramifications from their participation in certain activities. So this is very individual, but that's kind of the overall definition that we work with when we talk about problem gambling and gaming. Okay, so I do have a question for you all first, and if you are, please feel free to put your answers in the chat box. I'd love to hear from you. So, do you think that parents' technology use affects children? What are your folks' thoughts on this? Oh yeah, so I'm seeing in the chat box yes with an exclamation point. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Yeah, well, we would also agree. We would definitely say yes. And sometimes we're not always aware of this because, as adults, we probably have our own relationship with technology. We have our own understanding of how we use technology. We maybe have more of those sort of harm reduction skills that we are implementing in our lives already. But children might not understand that. So they might not know that we've already developed a relationship with technology. They may not know that we have these skills that we're practicing, or, they might not realize sort of the effect that technology might be having. So we do find that parents' technology use really does affect children. And we have here, listed a few different apps of different ways that we can kind of talk about family screen time. Things like family apps, Moment, which is a way of balancing screen time. We also have a family link app, which is specifically for Android that looks at that as well. And we also have some links to things like digital literacy skills. So really what we want to emphasize with this slide is our technology use, and as adults, our technology use, it really does have an impact on the youth around us. So we want to think critically about how we're using technology, because it also will impact those who we're interacting with, our kids, the youth that we have in our life, whoever it is, because they will be sort of interested in how we're relating to technology and be interested in kind of following our lead with this. So there's definitely conversations that we can sort of start having around this with those youth in our life to kind of develop some more of those helpful and healthy digital literacy skills and gaming and technology usage skills. So you know what, honestly, often when I'm having conversations around youth gambling and I tell people what the program is, a lot of people ask, like, are youth gambling? How are youth gambling? We know that the legal age to gamble is 18. So sometimes we're not always aware that youth are gambling, but we know that youth are in fact gambling. So 10% of Ontario teens have been found to gamble online. We also know that 31% of Ontario teens have gambled in any form. And if we just look at a few more statistics, so this is sort of a breakdown of how youth are gambling. So we see a lot of them are doing it through dares or challenges. This can be on the schoolyard. This can be, with their siblings. There's a lot of different ways that we can see this, sort of like, I will dare you to do this specific thing. And if you don't do it, you owe me this, that kind of language around dares. We also know that they're doing this through scratch tickets, games of skill, offline sports pools. We also have a few more statistics on this. We see that 7% of Ontario youth report symptoms of low to moderately severe gambling problems, and 2% of Ontario youth indicate a high severity gambling problem. So we really are seeing that youth are gambling, which is why this conversation is important for us to be having. And just a few more statistics on problem gambling. So we know that 8% of youth report gambling money on video games. So what we're going to be talking about today, we know that there is that prevalence of youth who are gambling money on video games, and 4% of youth are gambling money over the internet in other ways. So there's different ways we can gamble through internet gambling. There's different games we can play, but we also see a prevalence of that as well. And this one might be a little bit more self-explanatory because I think oftentimes we are aware that youth are gaming. So this has been split up into more of a binary understanding of gender, but we do see that 54% of Canadians are gamers, and 26% of Ontario students in grades 7 to 12 reported playing video games daily. We also know that 10% of youth in Ontario play video games for 5 hours or more per day, and 1 in 8 students in Ontario will report symptoms of a video game problem. So we know that youth are gaming. We really see those statistics are telling us that youth are indeed gaming. So Why are youth gaming and gambling? There's a lot of different reasons why youth are choosing to do this. We know, first and foremost, both of these activities are forms of entertainment, so they can just be fun things to do. There's also really that link with socializing. So there's social online platforms such as Twitch, which is sort of a social media platform that one can watch gaming, like gaming can be streamed on there. There's also gaming headsets, so there's really that sort of understanding and that community aspect that goes along with it as well. It can be linked to social status, and it can also be a form of relieving boredom or escaping. And just a note on escaping, we don't say that that is not a valid reason to game or gamble. We know that all of us, if we've had a long day of work or whatever it is that we're doing, we are choosing to escape usually in different ways. Sometimes, once in a while, maybe we're just turning on a show, maybe we are reading a book, we're just trying to maybe turn off our minds for a little bit. And sometimes that is something that we need to do. We do know, however, if we're using, or if youth or any of us are using gaming and gambling as a way to escape constantly from our life, and that's becoming sort of our sole coping mechanism, that's when we might get into a bit more of that problematic behavior, or it might be a warning sign that we're veering towards that, or that youth are veering towards that. But we do know that youth are choosing sometimes to game and gamble as an escape from their lives. And if that's happening once in a while, we do understand that that's a valid way of reacting to sometimes some of the hardships of life. But we just want to make sure it's not becoming the sole coping mechanism. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about gaming and gambling separately, but now I'm going to bring them together and kind of illustrate how these two subjects connect. So we do know that there is a small, but there's quite a significant correlation that's been found in research between the number of hours spent playing video games and the severity of problem gambling. And we also find that children who regularly play video games exhibit a false sense of confidence and security, and they'll take greater risks and gamble larger amounts. So we really do see that there is a link between gaming and gambling, and we know that youth are both gaming and gambling. So we can really see that that connection is starting to form there. Okay, so I have another poll question for you. So does anyone know at what age the brain is considered fully developed? So is it considered fully developed at 16, 18, 21, or 25? Okay, so I see a guess for 21. Yeah, so we actually find that the brain is fully and completely developed at 25. So I'll delve into this a little bit more, but so we know that the brain is continuing to develop until we're 25. Once we reach 25, that's when our brain has completely finished developing. And the prefrontal cortex, which is one of the parts of the brain, is actually amongst the last to fully develop. And this is the part of the brain, that is the one that controls our impulses, our higher level thinking, and our weighing of long-term consequences. So when we talk about this, it's by no means saying that youth don't have, they still have that ability to do these things, but that part of their brain has yet to be fully developed. So that means they might be more willing and more wanting to engage in that risky behavior, because that also helps their brain kind of do that, because when our brain is developing, we want to learn and we want to try new things and we want to engage in parts of our brain that we haven't yet. But we know that when our prefrontal cortex has not been fully developed, we might be more likely to engage in these sort of impulses and take riskier decisions, because we're not necessarily having that way of weighing those longer term consequences. Okay, so I'll chat a little bit now about how the lines can start to be blurred between gaming and gambling. And we find that there's some real correlation between things that show up in games and things that show up in gambling activities. So there's kind of two concepts that I'm going to go over here. The first is a concept called the variable ratio reinforcement schedule, which is quite a wordy concept. But basically what this means is that our brains just really like not knowing. So in a game, for example, we like not knowing when we're going to expect challenges, when we're going to expect rewards. If we knew exactly sort of the path that our character was going to take, we knew exactly when to expect a challenge, we knew exactly when we were going to win, it would be much less exciting. And the same thing shows up when we're gambling. So an example of this is with a slot machine. Like if we knew each time we were going to pull a lever on a slot machine that we would win, it might be exciting for the first 3 times because we'd be winning the money, but after a while we begin to lose interest and we would get a lot more bored because we wouldn't know what to expect. So basically what the variable ratio reinforcement schedule is telling us is that our brains like not knowing. And this is something that shows up both in gaming and gambling activities, that kind of keeping us a bit on our toes aspect. And then the second thing we find is basing decisions on patterns or experiences. And this is something called the gambler's fallacy. So this shows up in both gaming and gambling as well. And basically what the gambler's fallacy is telling us is that we like to feel like we're a bit more in control than we might always be in different situations. So with gambling, we know that it's a chance-based activity, but our brain likes to try and pick out patterns. So, if we're in a slot machine, if we're playing on a slot machine and we have a certain amount of numbers that come up, we might try and connect a pattern and sort of feel like we might be able to predict what's going to happen next. But with a lot of bets, each bet is going to be independent from the one beside it. So we never really know what to expect, but the gambler's fallacy tells us that we can kind of create patterns and have a way of sort of having a higher likelihood to win when we know that unfortunately the odds for the game are never going to change. And that same thing shows up in gaming as well. We like to kind of feel like we are more in control of the situation that we are, that we have more of a sense of if this has happened in a past level that we've done, it's going to show up again. We're never sure for sure that that is going to happen, but that gambler's fallacy shows up in both the games that we play and the games that youth are playing, as well as the gambling activities that we are participating in. So we see that this is some of the ways that the lines are being blurred between the two. Okay, so we are going to do a quick little activity, and I'm hoping my wheel is going to work. Sometimes it's a little finicky, so if not, I have a backup wheel. But what I like to call this is the wheel of colors. So basically, I'm going to spin the wheel, and I would love for folks to let me know what color you think the wheel is going to land on. So you can pick either blue, yellow, or white, and then I'll spin the wheel, and if the wheel lands on your color, that means that you won, and if it doesn't, that means that unfortunately you did lose. So does anyone have any guesses on what color they think the wheel is going to land on? Okay, I'm seeing a guess for yellow. Okay, so let's see what it lands on. Hopefully it works. Okay, it seems like it's working. Okay, so unfortunately it landed on blue, so I apologize if that was not the color that you chose. But what I'm actually going to give you the chance to do is to continue to play. So if you did choose blue, congratulations, you can move on to the next level. But if you didn't choose blue and you lost that round, I'm still going to give you the opportunity to play, but you're going to have to pay me 3 hypothetical YGAP dollars. So you can still play, but you'll just have to pay me that $3 and I'll give you that chance to play again. So if you are choosing to play again, what color are you thinking the wheel will land on this time? It's the same rules this time around. And you're also welcome to sit out this round if you don't want to risk the 3 hypothetical YGAP dollars. Okay, so I'm seeing a blue in the chat. Okay, so let's see what it lands on this time. Oh, okay, unfortunately it did land on white, so that means that if you didn't choose white, you didn't unfortunately win this game. But thank you all so much for participating. If you're playing at home, I would love to know if you did get them right, but if not, that's okay, it happens. So, when we play this game a lot with a lot of different groups, and what we say at YGAP is we like to play games, we always like to have a bit of a lesson behind it. So that game is kind of a demonstration of something that we call the freemium model. And what the freemium model is, it's basically a combination of free and premium. And it's this idea that you can start playing a game for free, but once you hit a certain point, there's ability to get into a bit of a premium model. So you can pay money and have the chance to unlock for other features, the chance to progress in the game. There's different abilities that you can get. So there's that premium attachment with a free sort of basis to the game. And a really classic example of this is the game Candy Crush. So with a game like that, sometimes how the game works is you have a certain amount of moves and you can try and win in that certain amount of moves. But if you run out of moves, what the game will do, it will offer you this chance to wager 5 gems or whatever it is, the in-game currency that they're using, for the chance to have 5 more moves. So you're not guaranteed moving on to the next level, but you are given that chance to have 5 more moves to see if you are able to complete the level with those moves. So I guess my question to you is, when a social media game offers you the chance to pay to play, do you think it changes its definition from a game to a form of gambling? What do folks think? Yeah, so I'm seeing in the chat, yes, and I would completely agree with you. So we would say that the freemium model would fall under our definition of gambling, because if I go back to what that is, it's if you risk something of value and you don't know if you're going to win or lose. So we definitely see that in this situation, you're risking that in-game currency, and sometimes we have to pay for that in-game currency, and you're not for sure going to make it to the end of the game. You have that chance to have 5 more moves. You might surpass the level in those 5 moves, but there's a good possibility that you might not, depending on how the candies fall. So there's that ability that you might win or you might lose. So we see that the freemium model is one of those other ways we see a bit of a combination between gaming and gambling, because it's this ability to wager, can be in-game currency, it can also be real money, for that chance to win or lose. So we would definitely say that a freemium model falls under our definition of gambling. Oh, the slides were reversed. So now we're going to talk a little bit about skins and loot crates. And folks might already be familiar with these, but I'll just go into a little definition about what they are and how they might be considered forms of gambling. So what skins are basically decorative items. So they show up in a lot of different video games, and they are often acquired through what we call loot crates. So loot crates are virtual mystery boxes, basically, and they can be bought with real money or with in-game currency. And oftentimes there are different forms of skins that will show up in these loot crates of varying values. So some skins are really highly sought after, and some are sort of not. They're more common and they're much less sort of valuable in that sense. So I have some examples for you all on the screen here. So we can see there's some valued at like about $4. It's more of a common skin, but we also know that there's like some of the other paraphernalia that we have here. This one's about $7,000 valued at. So that's a much more valuable skin. So we definitely see that they range in kind of price tags that are associated with them, but oftentimes they can be acquired by these loot crates. And with loot crates, there's a standard price, but what you're doing is you're paying for this virtual mystery box. So you're paying for this chance to win a very valuable skin, but also you might lose and kind of miss out on that valuable skin and might get a more common skin. So we find that these are often available in games such as Fortnite, League of Legends, Dota 2, and Counter-Strike. And talking about skins is really important when we talk about gaming and gambling, because skins are definitely one of the ways in which we find that youth are gambling. So skins can be sold, like in and of itself, they don't necessarily hold that value. I know I showed you that with the price tag, but they are just entities, just as something without a price tag, but they can be sold for that amount. So they can be sold for whatever they are retailed at. And this can be done on third-party sites, so things like Skin Cash or Skin Wallet. So they can be sold for real life currency. But in and of itself, they can also be used to place online bets on a lot of different things. So they can be used to place online bets on esports games, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but are sort of competitive video gaming tournaments. They can also be used to place bets on casino style games. So things like roulette, things like that. Skins can be sort of the currency that's put into that and the way that folks are able to wager a bet. And they can also be used in things like coin flips and raffles. So there's a lot of different ways that skins as an entity can be used to gamble. And that kind of brings us back when we think about our definition, when we take a bit more of an expansive approach and sort of move away from just thinking about gambling as associated with money, we see that there's a lot of different other things we can risk. And skins definitely fall into that category of something that holds value that we can risk for the chance to win and lose. So it's definitely one of the ways that we see gaming and gambling coming together, and also one of the ways that we know that youth are able to gamble, because anyone is able to acquire these skins and place these forms of bets. Okay, and we also know that there's different forms of gambling-like experiences that show up in different forms of games. So we talked about skins, but now we'll talk about sort of gambling-like experiences that are appearing in video games. So video games can use gambling activities like slot machines, and players can wager in-game currencies on an outcome. So an example of this is the game Plants vs. Zombies. And folks might already be familiar with this game. I will give a little summary in case we're not. But basically how the game works is there is a house that you are trying to protect from an impending kind of like throng of zombies. And what you could do is you can strategically place your plants along the game interface and to stop the zombies from reaching to your house. So the game in and of itself is a game of strategy. You have to know where to place the plants. There's definitely a strategy that can be developed. So it is really a skill-based game. We know that there is that ability. If you practice, you'll probably get a little bit better at the game. But we see that these chance-based elements are coming into the game. So an example of this is the slot machine that is part of the gaming interface. I do believe this was an earlier version of the game, but it definitely is something that we see showing up in the game. So this, by all means, looks like a slot machine. It's using sort of some of the Plants vs. Zombies motifs and aesthetics to sort of make it more sort of fit within the gaming interface. But we're definitely seeing this gambling-like experience happen within this game. And what players can do is they can wager any form of in-game currency, which sometimes can be linked with our real-world currency, for the chance to spin the slot machine and see what they end up with. And what we find here is this kind of inclusion of these gambling activities in video games can create a false understanding of chance and skill. So like I was mentioning, Plants vs. Zombies is a skill-based game, and we know that there's a lot of other games that involve elements of skill. So we do know that youth, if they're practicing at a video game, more likely than not, they're going to get better at it. There's just that ability, oftentimes there's strategy involved, there's different knowledge that comes with it. So there's really that skill that is associated with video gaming. But we know that gambling activities are chance-based. So we can't practice gambling. Even if we do, it by no means is going to sort of improve our odds. Gambling activities are always going to be left up to chance. So we're never sure what the outcome is going to be. However, when we combine this skill-based activity with a chance-based activity, like we see when we include these gambling-like activities in video games, players can begin to develop this false expectation, and they can start to believe that with sufficient practice, they can begin to control chance-based gambling activities. So you can kind of create this false understanding that gambling can be something that can be practiced and something that can be controlled. We know, unfortunately, that this is not the case, but it makes sense that in the brains of anyone who's playing this game, it gets a little confusing because it's this combination of skill and chance, and it really is hard to sort of parse those out. But that's why we find it's really important to talk about, because we know that this false understanding of chance and skill can happen through the inclusion of these gambling activities in video games. And I have another example for you here. So this is in a video game called Grand Theft Auto. And we really see here the vocabulary around skill even showing up. So this is someone who's being denied access to the roulette table in the video game because their player is told that their gambling skill is not high enough to play on this table. So we're seeing here that direct linkage between gambling and skill, which is very confusing for a player who's playing, and if it's a youth who's playing, because we can talk about how gambling is a chance-based activity, but when it's showing up in these skill-based sort of platforms, it can kind of muddle that understanding. So it's important for us to kind of parse that out and also understand that gambling, unfortunately, there is not a skill associated with it. It's always going to be that chance-based activity. Okay, so now I'll chat a little bit about the ESRB resources for parents. So folks might already be aware of these, but these are really great resources to know about. So what the ESRB stands for, it's the Entertainment Software Rating Board. So it exists in a lot of different platforms. And basically what it allows us to do is know what's in the specific video game. So any video game that any child is playing or any youth is playing will have a rating that's associated with it. So similarly to movie ratings, video games have that same sort of setup where it will let you know what the age range that the game is sort of marketed towards. But there's also a lot of different other content that can be found through these resources. So I said that you can get to know what's in the game. So there's actually things like content descriptors that can be found. So they will highlight to you if there's gambling-like experiences that's happening in the game, if it's simulated gambling, if it's real gambling that's occurring, but also things around violence and gore and any other kind of sort of activity that might be popping up in the game. So they're really good resources to know about in just sort of having a better understanding of what the games that your child or the youth in your life are playing, what do they actually entail? And the resources they also have, they have a lot of discussions around online safety and family discussions. So how to engage in these discussions of online safety, on technology use, on gaming as a family, in a group, sort of understanding what that can look like and how do we set those boundaries on technology usage and on gaming usage. And they'll also have some tips. They have tips for parents on just general understanding surrounding the game and also settings control. So it just allows a little bit more autonomy, and they can just be a really helpful resources to know about. Okay, so now we'll chat a little bit more about esports. So esports are really similar to traditional sports. So watching football or basketball in a stadium or something like that. Esports are a very similar concept. So There are teams, there are leagues, there are fans, there are sponsorships, media deals, and money that's involved in esports. And really what it is, it's all surrounding competitive video gaming. So just as there's the same amount of sort of hype around traditional sports and sort of all the funding that goes in traditional sports and all the different ways that we can engage in traditional sports and viewing traditional sports, we see that same thing show up for esports as well. So another thing that's important to note is similar to traditional sports, in esports, people can bet on the outcome as well. So you might be familiar with sports betting. It's very common practice. And in sports betting, folks can choose to bet on who's going to win the game, who's going to get the first point, things like that. And that happens in esports as well. So folks can bet on who will win the game, who will get the first kill, anything like that. That sort of same structure that shows up in sports betting exists in esports betting as well. And we know that the way in which we can bet on esports is expensive. So we can use real currency. We can also use skins. We can use a lot of different ways to bet on esports, but there is that same sort of structure surrounding esports betting that there is to sports betting. And when we talk about gaming and gambling, it's also good that we talk about internet gambling. So, simply put, internet gambling is just a general term used for gambling on the internet. So it's very expensive. It can include a lot of different things. So things like casino style gambling activities, like we see on the right, but it can also be used, different forms of games that we can see. There are different apps that exist. And players can wager real world currency or in-game currency against a computer component or against a real individual who's on the other side of the screen. So there's a lot of different ways that we can gamble online. So does playing on free gambling sites impact the transition to gambling with real money? So when I say free gambling sites, I think it's good if I kind of provide a little bit more information of what I mean by that. So what a free gambling site really is, similar to what the name implies, it means that you can play gambling activities, but there's no actual money put towards it. So you can play things like roulette, poker, any kind of game that you can think of really, but there's no actual financial component that's put towards it. So that means you're not putting any money to play, but also means if you win, you don't walk away with any money. It just will tell you that you could have won this. And we do find that playing on free gambling sites does really impact the transition to gambling with real money. And oftentimes this is because it can create misinformation about how gambling really works. And it can really impact that transition. So when I say misinformation, usually on a free gambling site, there's much better odds. So that means that players, when they're playing, there's a much higher likelihood that they are going to win. And there's also much more inflated payouts. So it might say if a player won, that they won $200. In a real situation where real money was wagered, that payout might not exist or might not be as high as it was in the specific free game. But we see that is showing up in a lot of these free gambling sites. And what that can mean is really for players who are playing it, they can start to maybe put higher wagers or make riskier decisions as well. Because when it's free, we might not have that same sort of understanding of risk. I mean, it is free, so we're not actually wagering any money. So maybe we're much more likely to sort of put more money into a situation or make riskier decisions. I know that even just when I'm playing poker in a situation and I'm not putting any money, I'm going to make riskier decisions than I am if I'm actually playing with money. That is just sort of the way that my brain is going to work. But what that can kind of do is create this disassociation between action and consequence. So if we're kind of developing a bit of that muscle that we're playing on these free sites, we're making really risky decisions, and maybe we're starting to see that we're winning. So we're not actually making any money, but all of a sudden we're being shown that we could have won $200 or we could have won $400 or whatever it is that we could have won. That might mean that we're sort of more inclined to maybe start gambling with real money. That transition, it makes sense for our brains or in the brains of youth to kind of think that this could be something that we could do. But it's important for us to remember that, and it's important for us when we're talking to youth about this, for them to remember that playing on a free gambling site is different than gambling with real money or playing on a gambling site where you are gambling with real money. And it's important for us to remember that that action does have a consequence. So when we're playing with real money, anything that we are wagering, any bet that we're putting, we have to be willing and be okay with the fact that we might lose it, because we know there's always that possibility when we're gambling. So we always want to make sure that we know that when we're gambling, our actions do have consequences. And when we get up into that bit of that disassociation, it can kind of put the youth or us even at risk, because we might start to lose the fact that we are wagering real money when we do get onto these gambling with real money sites. So we do find that there is definitely an impact in the transition from free gambling sites to gambling with real money. And it's just important we're aware of the differences between the two. And when we talk to youth, they're also aware of that, because there are differences and it can impact our transition. So we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page of what the differences look like. So when we talk about how to get monies into video games, or into the virtual world, there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. So things like Google Play cards, Facebook cards, this is maybe a little bit more outdated, but PlayStation Store, we have iTunes gift cards, PayPal gift cards, or PayPal cards that we can use that have money on them, Xbox gift cards, like prepaid credit cards. Those also are one of the ways we can definitely get money into the virtual world. Visa gift cards, similarly a prepaid credit card. Bitcoin is also a way that we are seeing increasingly that folks are able to get money into the virtual world. And then, yeah, these are just a few more examples. So there's a lot of different ways that youth or that we are able to get money into the virtual world. And that definitely does, there's a multitude of different ways that we can do that. And we find that it's easier for us to wager virtual currency than it is real life currency. So when we talk about ways that we can get virtual currency into we can get our money into the virtual world, that has an impact on us, because it's actually a lot easier for us once we have money in the virtual world to spend it. It's a lot easier for youth, similarly, to spend that money once it's in the virtual world. And that's often because there is that decreased perception of the value of cash online. So an example of this is even just with poker chips. So we know that online poker chips, they're an abstraction of actual poker chips. And for folks who might not know, if you've never played poker, when you play poker, you have to put in a certain amount of money or however much money that you're wanting to spend, and then you'll get some chips in return. So already we're seeing that that is an abstraction of real money. We've put in $50 and we've gotten back a certain amount of chips. But on the online world, we're getting an online poker chip. So that's an abstraction of that real poker chip already. So we're getting into a bit of an abstraction of an abstraction. And it makes sense that along the way, we begin to lose some of that value of cash, and we begin to maybe have that decreased perception of what that value looks like. And similarly, when we're talking to youth, if we're betting with in-game currencies, if we're betting with gems that we've made, that we've bought in a video game, if we're betting with anything, or if we're spending money with anything. So if we're spending gems to buy loot crates, for example, we might have a bit of a decreased perception of that value of cash, because oftentimes virtual currencies are a little bit more confusing. So we might get into a bit of a thing where we might have put $20 into the virtual world, and then we've ended up with 427 gems. And we don't always have that understanding that that's $20, because the number's gotten a little fuzzy, and we've maybe lost a bit of that understanding that that is money that we put into it, because all of a sudden it's become this virtual thing. It's become a little bit more removed for us. So that does mean that youth, and ourselves included, it's easier for us to wager it, and it's easier for us to continue to spend it. So when we're talking to youth, it's really important that we remind them, and we remind ourselves as well, that virtual money is still real money. So if they put money into the virtual world, that money that's in the virtual world is the money that they put into it. So that's $20, that's $50. If it's money that you have given them, that's the money that has gone into the virtual world. So it's really important to them to remember the value of what that cash is, and to also know that it will feel a little bit less valuable as soon as it's in the virtual world. So they have that understanding that it might feel less valuable, but virtual money is still very much real money. Okay, so when we think about online gambling and offline gambling, there are definitely some clear differences that we want to talk about. The biggest thing is probably the accessibility. So similarly to the online world, we have that 24-hour availability, and there are casinos that exist and different platforms that exist that are 24 hours, but it is less accessible if we have to leave our house, if we have to, there's different factors that go into that. But in an online space, we know that there's a lot more accessibility because it's available. We can do it from our bedroom. We don't have to leave. We can do it on our phone. It can just sort of come with us wherever we go. So that can definitely impact how we interact with it. We also know that there's an accelerated speed of play and absorbing nature. So similarly to gaming, it can start to feel a bit of like a video game. And it can be very accelerated, it can be very exciting, and it can be very absorbing in that same way. Yeah, and like I was saying, it can start to feel like we're playing a bit of a computer video game. But what's important and what we try to remind youth when we're talking to them is that although it might feel like we're in a video game, if we are in the minus on the game that we're playing, we're going to owe money. So basically, even if it's a video game, even if it feels like we're playing a game, if we're wagering real money or if we're playing for money, if we do lose the game, we do owe money. So it is a little different than just a video game that we're playing where we're not wagering money. So that's a really important distinction that we like to point out. We also know that with online gambling, there really is an increased risk that children can find and use the site. So we know that online gambling does allow for that increase of underage gambling. Children can access the site in different ways. They can use someone's account who is legal. There are different ways that they're able to access it. So we know that that is one of the differences between online gambling and offline gambling as well. We also know that problem gambling is a lot more prevalent amongst internet gamblers than non-internet gamblers. And we actually see it's quite a bit different. So it's 5% versus 0.5%. And this doesn't necessarily mean that the online medium is more dangerous. It's just a differentiating factor. So it's not to say that online gambling is offline gambling is a lot less dangerous than online gambling. It's just that we know that there are those statistics that do show that problem gambling is more prevalent amongst internet gamblers. And as well with online gambling, we know there is that increased risk of online fraud. So anytime that we're putting any form of our banking information online, anytime that a youth is putting their banking information online, there's that risk of online fraud. There's that risk that the site that they're putting their information into is not credible. There's a risk that there's always that risk of fraud. So that's definitely another difference that we see show up in online gambling and offline gambling as well. So we'll talk a little bit now about what some of the warning signs can be of problem gaming and gambling. And just before I delve into this list, it's just important to note that, and like I mentioned at the beginning, the way that someone might experience problem gaming and problem gambling is much different. So the way that we experience any problem is individual to us. So this is by no means a comprehensive list, and by no means also is it a checklist. It's just sort of some general warning signs that are good to look out for. So what behaviorally this can look like is maybe the inability to stop, maybe missing school, work, or other important commitments, lying about gaming, online use, or gambling use habits. So maybe lying about the amount of time that they are gambling or gaming, stealing to pay for gambling habits or game purchases, and also that decrease in social connection or time spent with friends. So their time is really being spent more so on gaming or gambling. Psychologically, we know it can also look like depression and anxiety when unable to play or playing to escape problems. So like I mentioned, we know that some of the reasons that youth are choosing to game and gamble is to escape. And in moderation, that is a valid choice to do. But we just want to make sure that if youth are beginning to play problems, or if playing is sort of the way that they're coping with everyday life, that can start to get maybe into a bit more of a problematic relationship. So it's something we just want to be on the lookout for. Physically, this can look like physical health impacts, fatigue, difficulty sleeping. And financially, it can start to look like borrowing money, perhaps stealing money appearing and disappearing. There can maybe getting into a bit of debt, spending money before paydays, and chasing losses. So what I mean when I say chasing losses is sometimes when we're gambling and we have lost, and maybe we've lost a little bit more than we're comfortable with, we can get to this mentality that, we're guaranteed a win soon because we've lost so many times in a row. Unfortunately, when we gamble, we're never guaranteed anything. That outcome is always going to be left up to chance. But sometimes when we get into that mentality, we can just keep playing in that hope to kind of make up that money that we've lost. Ultimately, though, this often leaves us even more in a deficit and ends up that we've actually ended up losing a lot more money than we started out with. So when we start to see that folks are beginning to chase losses, that's when maybe it becomes a bit more of a warning sign and something that we want to think about a little bit more. So when we think about how we can protect our children, there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. So one of the things that we recommend is, protecting personal information. So making sure that when we're talking to our children, when we're talking to youth, we're encouraging them to do the same. So making sure that they're protecting their name, their age, their location, their credit card information is a big one. So if they are choosing to link any of their own money to the game. Encouraging them to use prepaid credit cards can be a really great way of helping them also spend, like have a money limit, because with prepaid credit cards, there is that money limit of you can only spend however much that is on the card, but it also protects their banking information if they're using it, or if they're using your card, it also protects your banking information as well. Also remaining positively engaged. So making sure that we're having those conversations around gaming and gambling. Sometimes it can feel like a really big conversation to have, but just making sure that we're involved in the games that they are playing, and we are open with them about their gaming habits so they feel like we can have those conversations. Another one is, educating ourselves. So learning about what gaming materials are popular with youth, the language that exists, the genres that exist, as well as those game rating systems and content. So the ESRB resources can be really helpful for us when we're talking to youth, because it just gives us more of a sense of what's going on in the game, and we can engage in a conversation of the content that is being presented to youth in that particular game. As well, empowering your children to handle problems. So we know that online there is that increased risk of cyberbullying and online harassment. So just making sure that we know that our children have the tools to be able to handle that, but also knowing that we are there to support them. So also promoting positive play. So doing things like, when we think about harm reduction, a lot of the harm reduction strategies we recommend is making sure that we're setting time limits, money limits, so that we're not engaging solely in one activity. We're engaging in offline activities as well, making games a social activity so that we're not losing that social connection, or youth aren't losing that social connection, and setting priorities. So making sure that if your child or whatever youth is that you're involved with, if they have homework to do, if they have a job that they're doing, if they, whatever it is, whatever other priorities, if they have chores that they're expected to do around the house, making sure that they're also understanding that that's the priority. And gaming and gambling is a form of entertainment that should be done around the priorities. So they should have all of their priorities met first. Another thing we can do is enable parental control. So those exist, and those can be a way if we want to do that as well. Okay, so that kind of brings me to the end of what I have to talk about today, and then I'll open it up to any questions. But I will just leave you with a few help and referral organizations that are really great to know about. So the first one that I really want to talk about is Connex Ontario. So Connex Ontario is an addiction, mental health, and problem gambling service. They are a really great service to know about. Basically, what you can do is you can call on behalf of yourself or on behalf of someone else. And they have this really large database, and they don't ask for any personal identifiers. They just might ask you about where your location is, and then they will connect you with any kind of local resources in your area. So specifically along the lines of addiction, mental health, and problem gambling resources. So this might be inpatient treatment services, support groups, whatever it is specifically that you're looking for. They have a lot of that information in a database. So they're a really great starting place if you're ever looking for local supports for you or any youth that you're involved in. Another one we have here is the CAMH treatment for problem gambling and gaming and internet usage. We have the Lifeline Canada Foundation, which is a registered nonprofit committed to providing to positive mental health and suicide prevention in Canada and worldwide. We have Game Quitters, which is really great to know about. It's a YouTube channel. It's a community forum to overcoming video game addiction. They have really great videos that kind of talk about some of the aspects of video game addiction. They also have a forum. So if folks are looking for sort of that community support, they're a really great resource to know about. There's Children's Mental Health Ontario, which is also a great one, as well as Online Gamers Anonymous. So, similarly to how we might know like Alcoholics Anonymous, the same sort of platforms exist for gaming addiction. And they're a really great resource to know about as well, if that's sort of the support that your youth or you are looking for. Oh, my computer is freezing up here. And then other resources that I just want to highlight, you've probably heard of these ones before, but they're really great for if you're working with children or you're working with your children or any youth, is Kids Help Phone and Good to Talk. So Good to Talk is sort of the post-secondary equivalent to Kids Help Phone, and it's another free resource to know about. Basically, your child or any youth can call them, and they're confidential, they're free, they're open 24/7, and they're really just there to chat. So there doesn't need to be specifically about gaming or gambling. If your child's having a bad day, if they just need a little bit of additional support, they're really just there to support. So they connect with a licensed therapist, and they're there to just offer a listening ear and also some supportive sort of tools for how to deal with the situation. So a really good resource to know about as well. And lastly, just some more resources about gaming, just because it's always good to have a sort of a plethora of educational resources. So I won't touch too much on all of these, but we actually do have a YMCA Youth Services Parents Guide to Gaming, which can be a helpful thing to know about. The entertainment software rating boards have a lot of great resources. We have Media Smarts, where when we talk about media literacy, if we're wanting to engage in those family conversations, this is a really great starting one as well. It provides us sort of those building blocks to engage on that conversation. And then we also have Common Sense Media, which provides independent reviews, age rating, and other information about all types of media. So if we're looking to educate ourselves on the media that our kids are engaging with, this is a good tool to know about as well. And that brings me to the end of what I have prepared for today. So I will open it up to any questions. I do have a quick evaluation of the presentation that I'll just put in the chat box if you're able to fill it. It's really quick. It's like 5 questions, should take about 30 seconds. They're all multiple choice. But yeah, I'll open up the floor to any questions about anything I talked about. I know I covered a lot of material, so I'm happy to expand or unpack anything that we discussed today. I will.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your presentation. It was very informative and I learned a lot. I also find it such a timely topic right now with so many kids into gaming. I'm now going to stop the recording and just open it up for some questions.